in 2026 and 2027, the United States will witness a new wave of executions, with some of the most controversial cases in recent history. From long-awaited justice to legal battles over mental illness and fair trials, these inmates' final days are raising critical questions about the death penalty. Are these executions justified, or are we pushing the boundaries of justice? Stay tuned as we explore the crimes, the methods, and the ongoing debates that surround these death row inmates' final moments. We'll look at the chilling 2026 executions and go over the horrible executions of 2027. Be prepared for a deep revelation. Antonio Sanchez Franklin. Antonio Sanchez Franklin, aged 47, is scheduled to be executed in Ohio by lethal injection on February 11, 2026, for the murders of 2 victims during a robbery in 2008. Franklin committed the crime when he entered a home with the intent to rob the occupants. The victims, a middle-aged couple, were violently attacked during the robbery. In the course of the crime, Franklin shot both individuals, killing them before fleeing the scene. After the murders, Franklin ransacked the home, stealing valuables. Evidence collected from the crime scene, including DNA and fingerprints, eventually led investigators to Franklin, who was arrested and later confessed to the killings. During his trial, Franklin's defense team argued that his actions were influenced by financial struggles, but the jury found this argument insufficient to mitigate his crime. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, as well as robbery and aggravated burglary. His death sentence was upheld after several appeals, and Franklin's legal avenues have been exhausted. James Earl Trimble. James Earl Trimble, a 65-year-old inmate from Ohio, is scheduled to be executed on March 12, 2026. He will face lethal injection as the method of execution. Trimble was convicted of the brutal murders of a mother and her young child during a home invasion in 1993. The crime occurred when Trimble, armed with a weapon, forcibly entered the victim's home in a quiet Ohio neighborhood. During the robbery, the mother attempted to defend her child, but both were killed in a violent and senseless attack. After the murders, Trimble ransacked the house and fled the scene, leaving behind little evidence except for the weapon and a bloody crime scene. Trimble's motive appeared to be robbery, but the cold-blooded nature of the crime, particularly the murder of the child, shocked the local community. Investigators were able to identify Trimble through forensic evidence, including DNA and fingerprints found at the crime scene. After his arrest, he confessed to the murders, showing little remorse. During his trial, Trimble's defense team did not dispute the facts of the case, but argued that his actions were influenced by a history of substance abuse and mental health issues. Despite these claims, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, aggravated burglary, and robbery. Trimble was sentenced to death. His legal team filed several appeals over the years, but all were denied, and the Ohio Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. Gerald Robert Hand. Gerald Robert Hand, aged 77, is scheduled to be executed in Ohio by lethal injection on June 17, 2026, for the murder of a woman during a carjacking in 1994. Hand's crime occurred when he targeted an elderly woman who had been out shopping in a parking lot. After following her to her car, he forced her into the vehicle and demanded money. When the victim struggled to comply, Hand violently attacked her, ultimately killing her during the robbery. After the murder, Hand stole the woman's car and fled the scene, leaving behind a bloody crime scene. Investigators were able to track Hand through surveillance footage, and forensic evidence found in the car led to his arrest. During his trial, Hand's defense team argued that his actions were influenced by his troubled upbringing and substance abuse issues. However, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. He was sentenced to death, and despite filing multiple appeals, his conviction and sentence were upheld by the Ohio Supreme Court. Cleveland Raman Jackson. Cleveland Raman Jackson, age 48, is scheduled to be executed in Ohio by lethal injection on July 15, 2026, for the murder of a police officer during a robbery in 2005. Jackson's crime occurred when he and an accomplice attempted to rob a store in Ohio. During the robbery, a police officer who was responding to the call entered the store and confronted the suspects. Jackson, armed with a firearm, opened fire on the officer, fatally shooting him in cold blood. After killing the officer, Jackson and his accomplice fled the scene, but they were apprehended shortly afterward, and forensic evidence, along with witness testimonies, tied them to the murder. During his trial, Jackson's defense team argued that he acted out of fear and panic, but the jury found him guilty of the first-degree murder of a police officer, aggravated robbery, and felonious assault. Despite his legal team's efforts to appeal the case, the Ohio Supreme Court upheld his death sentence, and Jackson's legal options have been exhausted. Danny Lee Hill. Danny Lee Hill, age 59, is scheduled to be executed in Ohio by lethal injection on July 22, 2026, for the 1985 murder of 12-year-old Raymond Fife. Hill's crime occurred when he abducted Fife, a developmentally disabled child, from a public area. After taking him to a secluded location, Hill assaulted the child and then murdered him. The crime was initially unsolved until forensic evidence linked Hill to the scene. This evidence, alongside witness testimonies, led to his arrest and conviction. During his trial, Hill's defense team argued that he had significant intellectual disabilities, which should be taken into account during sentencing. Despite these claims, Hill was convicted of first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and related charges, and was sentenced to death. Hill has spent years on death row, with numerous appeals filed based on his intellectual disabilities and the fairness of his trial. However, these appeals were denied, and his death sentence was upheld by the Ohio Supreme Court. James Derrick ONeal. James Derrick ONeal, age 72, is scheduled to be executed in Ohio by lethal injection on August 19, 2026, for the murders of two elderly victims during a robbery in 2003. ONeal's crime occurred when he targeted an elderly couple living alone in their home. After forcing his way into their residence, ONeal attacked the victims, robbing them of their valuables. During the assault, he brutally murdered both the husband and wife, leaving their bodies behind before fleeing the scene. Investigators were able to link ONeal to the crime through physical evidence found at the scene, which led to his arrest. During his trial, ONeal's defense team argued that his actions were the result of a difficult upbringing and struggles with substance abuse. However, the jury found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and other related charges, ultimately sentencing him to death. Despite several appeals, including arguments regarding his mental health, ONeal's death sentence was upheld by the Ohio Supreme Court. Jerome Henderson. Jerome Henderson, age 67, is scheduled to be executed in Ohio by lethal injection on October 21, 2026, for the murder of an elderly woman during a robbery in 2004. Henderson's crime occurred when he entered the home of his victim, an elderly woman who lived alone. After a violent confrontation, he murdered her during a robbery, stealing her personal belongings. The crime was particularly shocking due to the victim's age and vulnerability. Investigators were able to connect Henderson to the crime scene through forensic evidence, which led to his arrest. During his trial, Henderson's defense team argued that he was influenced by a difficult past and struggles with substance abuse. However, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder, aggravated burglary, and robbery, sentencing him to death. Despite several appeals, including arguments about his mental health and the fairness of his trial, the Ohio Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. Melvin D Bonell Jr. Melvin D Bonell Jr., age 69, is scheduled to be executed in Ohio by lethal injection on November 18, 2026, for the double homicide committed during a robbery in 1990. Bonell's crime occurred when he and an accomplice broke into the home of an elderly couple with the intent to rob them. During the robbery, Bonell and his accomplice fatally shot both victims in cold blood. After the murders, they ransacked the house, stealing valuables before fleeing the scene. Investigators were able to link Bonell to the crime through physical evidence and witness statements, leading to his arrest. During his trial, Bonell's defense team argued that he had a troubled upbringing and a history of substance abuse, which may have influenced his actions. However, the jury found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and burglary, and he was sentenced to death. Keith Lamar. Keith Lamar, age 57, was convicted for his role in a violent prison uprising in 1993 that led to the deaths of several corrections officers. The incident occurred at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, where Lamar, along with other inmates, took control of a cell block and held hostages, leading to a standoff with prison authorities. During the course of the uprising, several officers were killed, and Lamar was accused of being one of the individuals responsible for their deaths. Lamar was sentenced to death for his involvement in the killings, although he has consistently maintained his innocence. His legal team argues that Lamar was not directly responsible for the murders, claiming that he was merely an accomplice. However, the prosecution presented evidence during his trial that Lamar played a central role in the events, leading to his conviction. Over the years, Lamar's case has been a point of contention, with his supporters citing issues related to the fairness of his trial and the adequacy of legal representation. Despite his appeals, Lamar's conviction has been upheld, and all attempts to overturn the death sentence have been unsuccessful. His case has garnered national attention, with many questioning the use of the death penalty for crimes committed in a prison setting, particularly when the exact circumstances of the killings remain disputed. Lamar's execution will proceed by lethal injection, the standard method used in Ohio. He is scheduled to be executed on January 13, 2027. Lamar will have the opportunity to make a final statement before his execution, though it remains uncertain whether he will express remorse or maintain his claims of innocence. Scott A. Group. Scott A. Group, age 62, was convicted for the brutal murder of an elderly woman during a burglary in 2005. Group, along with an accomplice, broke into the victim's home with the intent to rob her. During the burglary, the victim was attacked and murdered. Group then stole her belongings and fled the scene. The crime was particularly violent, and the victim's body was discovered soon after. Investigators were able to trace Group through forensic evidence, including DNA found at the crime scene. During his trial, Group's defense team claimed that he was influenced by his past experiences and substance abuse. However, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and burglary. Group was sentenced to death, and despite several appeals, his conviction was upheld by the Ohio Supreme Court. Group is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on February 17, 2027. Gregory Lot. Gregory Lot, age 65, was convicted for the murder of a convenience store clerk during a robbery in 1992. The crime occurred when Lot, armed with a firearm, entered a convenience store and attempted to rob the clerk. During the robbery, Lot shot and killed the clerk, and then stole money and merchandise before fleeing the scene. The victim, a young woman, was found dead behind the counter, and the crime shocked the local community. Investigators quickly identified Lot as a suspect through surveillance footage and physical evidence found at the scene. During his trial, Lot's defense team argued that his actions were a result of financial hardship and drug addiction, but the jury convicted him of first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and other related charges. Lot was sentenced to death for the killing of the store clerk. Despite several appeals, including challenges to the fairness of his trial and claims about his mental health, the Ohio Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. Lot is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on April 14, 2027. John Stoettz. John Stoettz, aged 71, was convicted for the brutal murders of an elderly couple during a robbery gone wrong in 1989. The crime occurred when Stoettz and an accomplice broke into the home of the victims, both in their 70s, with the intent to rob them. During the robbery, the victims were attacked and murdered in a violent manner. After killing them, Stoettz and his accomplice ransacked the house and stole personal belongings before fleeing the scene. The bodies were discovered soon after, and the crime sparked a major investigation. Stoettz was arrested after evidence, including fingerprints and witness testimonies, linked him to the crime. During his trial, Stoetz's defense team argued that he was influenced by his troubled upbringing and substance abuse issues, but the jury found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, aggravated burglary, and robbery. He was sentenced to death, and despite several attempts at appeal, His death sentence was upheld by the Ohio Supreme Court. Stoettz is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on May 19, 2027. Archie James Dixon. Archie James Dixon, age 54, was convicted for the 1995 murder of his former business partner. The crime occurred when Dixon, in an attempt to settle a financial dispute, fatally shot his business partner during a confrontation. The victim, who had been in a long-standing business relationship with Dixon, was shot multiple times in a heated argument that escalated into violence. After the murder, Dixon fled the scene and attempted to cover his tracks, but forensic evidence and witness statements eventually led to his arrest. During his trial, Dixon's defense team argued that the murder was not premeditated, but was the result of a momentary loss of control due to the ongoing financial tensions. However, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and other related charges, and he was sentenced to death. Despite filing multiple appeals, Dixon's conviction and sentence were upheld by the Ohio Supreme Court. Dixon is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on June 16, 2027. Timothy Lee Hoffner. Timothy Lee Hoffner, aged 55, was convicted of the brutal murder of two young women in 2002. The crime occurred when Hoffner, along with an accomplice, kidnapped the victims, assaulted them, and ultimately murdered them. The bodies of the two women were discovered in a remote area, and the crime was particularly disturbing due to the nature of the assault and the victim's vulnerability. Hoffner and his accomplice were apprehended shortly after the murders, and forensic evidence, including DNA found at the crime scene, linked Hoffner to the killings. During his trial, Hoffner's defense team argued that he was influenced by his troubled past and mental health issues, but the jury convicted him of 2 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and other related charges. He was sentenced to death for his role in the killings. Hoffner's legal team filed multiple appeals, including arguments regarding the fairness of his trial and his mental state at the time of the crime, but the Ohio Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. Hoffner is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on July 14, 2027. John David Stump. John David Stump, age 66, was convicted of the murder of his girlfriend's family in 1993. The crime occurred when Stump, after a heated argument, brutally attacked his girlfriend's mother, father, and brother in their home. The victims were shot and killed in a violent and unprovoked attack. Following the murders, Stump set the house on fire in an attempt to cover up the crime. The bodies of the victims were discovered shortly afterward, and investigators were able to link Stump to the murders through forensic evidence and witness testimonies. During his trial, Stump's defense team argued that the killings were the result of an emotional outburst due to the strained relationship he had with the victims. However, the jury found him guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, arson, and other related charges. He was sentenced to death, and despite several appeals, including claims about the fairness of his trial, the Ohio Supreme Court upheld his sentence. Stump is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on August 18, 2027. Lawrence Alfred Landram. Lawrence Alfred Landram, age 65, was convicted for the murder of a gas station attendant during a robbery in 1996. The crime occurred when Landram, armed with a weapon, entered a gas station and attempted to rob the attendant. During the robbery, Landram shot and killed the attendant, taking money and other valuables before fleeing the scene. The crime was particularly shocking due to its violence and the vulnerability of the victim, who was working alone at the gas station. Landram was arrested shortly after the crime, and forensic evidence, including fingerprints and witness statements, linked him to the murder. During his trial, Landram's defense team argued that he was under significant personal stress and that the murder was not premeditated, but the jury convicted him of first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and other related charges. He was sentenced to death. Landram's appeals have been unsuccessful, and his death sentence was upheld by the Ohio Supreme Court. He is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on October 13, 2027. Warren Keith Hennis. Warren Keith Hennis, age 64, was convicted for the murder of his wife and two children in 1997. The crime occurred when Hennis, in a violent outburst, killed his wife and their two young children. The victims were found in their home, having suffered from multiple injuries. Investigators were able to link Hennis to the crime through forensic evidence, and he was arrested shortly after. During his trial, Hennis's defense team argued that his actions were influenced by his troubled background and mental health issues. However, the jury found him guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death. Despite several attempts at appeal, including arguments about his mental state, the Ohio Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. Hennis is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on December 15, 2027. As we look ahead to 2026 and 2027, these executions represent a mix of long-delayed cases and current ones that are set to be carried out. The death penalty remains a highly contentious issue, with these cases continuing to raise significant ethical, legal, and moral questions. Make sure to subscribe and comment below with your thoughts on the death penalty. What are your opinions on these upcoming executions? Let's discuss.